Listen carefully. The world tells you that cruelty belongs to the strong, that the tyrant, the conqueror, the brutal man are men of power. But it is a lie. Cruelty is not born from strength. It is born from weakness pretending to be strong. Only the fragile must shout to be heard. Only the hollow must crush to feel solid. Only the small must destroy to seem large. Every act of cruelty is an act of panic, a frightened soul thrashing against the truth of its own impotence. The cruel man does not dominate because he is confident. He dominates because he is terrified of disappearing. He has not mastered power. He is possessed by it. You can see it in his eyes, not confidence, but desperation. The hunger to prove that he exists. Cruelty is not strength unrestrained, it is fear unhealed. The hand that strikes is the hand that trembles. The voice that commands is the voice that hides a cry. The empire that conquers is the child that was never held. We live in a world that mistakes noise for authority. But noise is what fills the void when meaning is absent. The strong are silent. The weak must shout. The truly powerful need no witness. Only the fragile need applause. You can dress insecurity in medals. You can wrap it in uniforms. You can elect it, crown it, or worship it. It remains the same trembling creature underneath. The cruel world is not ruled by monsters. It is ruled by the frightened, and fear in power becomes savagery. Schopenhauer was right. The will to live, when cornered by its own futility, becomes rage. The man who cannot endure his own mind seeks to control the minds of others. That is the first law of human cruelty. What a man cannot master within, he must attempt to master without. When the inner world collapses, the outer world becomes a stage for vengeance. The bully beats the quiet one because he cannot bear the mirror of calm. The tyrant demands obedience because silence terrifies him. The zealot preaches punishment because doubt gnaws at his own faith. What they destroy in others is what they most fear in themselves. The cruel man cannot sit in silence. He must create noise to drown the sound of his own failure. He cannot look inward, so he rearranges the world to resemble his disorder. Look closely at history. Every empire of blood was born from the same wound. The wound of weakness dressed as destiny. The conqueror called it glory. The ideologue called it truth. The fanatic called it God. But beneath every banner was the same whisper, I am afraid. The desire to dominate is the child of fear. The desire to humiliate is the child of envy. The desire to control is the child of helplessness. And yet, the world praises these men because we too are frightened. We too confuse aggression with courage, certainty with wisdom, and noise with truth. The strong do not create cruel worlds. They create order. The weak create cruelty because they cannot create peace. Peace requiert patience. Cruelty requires panic. The strong can wait. The weak must act. The strong can listen. The weak must shout. The strong can lose without losing themselves. The weak cannot, so they destroy others to hide the fracture. You see, cruelty is not power expressed. It is fear amplified. Behind every cruel gesture, there is the invisible scream, see me, believe me, fear me. Because the weak man does not know how to be loved. He only knows how to be feared. And so he builds his life around terror, a fragile monument to his own insecurity. He calls it success. He calls it leadership. He calls it victory. But it is only the will frantic, blind, devouring. Watch the cruel man closely. You will see exhaustion behind the rage. He is not free. He is enslaved to the performance of strength. He cannot stop performing, for the mask has fused with the skin. Without it, he would crumble. Cruelty is not chosen, it is a reflex. The reflex of the wounded pretending not to bleed. And in this world, where wounds are hidden and arrogance is rewarded, cruelty becomes culture. We praise domination. We envy control. The worship conquest. And beneath the applause, we ignore the trembling. The cruelty of the world is the cry of men who never learn to weep. You can hear it in their laughter. You can see it in their excess. You can feel it in their silence, that desperate silence that waits for another to suffer first. We call them leaders, but they are only frightened children wearing crowns. The lie of gentleness is this, that kindness is weakness and cruelty is strength. In truth, it is the opposite. It takes courage to be kind, because kindness requires stability. It requires that you have something solid enough inside to offer peace to others without losing yourself. The cruel man cannot give peace, because he has none. He can only share his chaos. This is the paradox. The weak man cannot bear fragility, so he creates a world that mirrors his own violence, hoping it will make him feel strong. But cruelty never cures weakness, it deepens it. For every act of domination, he becomes more dependent on fear to feel alive. And so he builds empires of control that collapse the moment he blinks. This is how the weak create cruel worlds, not out of malice, but out of terror. They fear that gentleness will expose them. They fear that silence will reveal them. They fear that love will unmask them. So they destroy what could save them. The world burns because men are afraid to be small. The cruelty you see outside is only the trembling of 1,000 frightened hearts, disguised as authority. And when you understand this, you stop fearing the tyrant. You start pitying him. For he who cannot master himself must rule the world just to keep his hands from shaking. Weakness has many disguises. It rarely walks naked. It wears conviction. It wears charm. It even wears humility when it must. But underneath, it trembles. Weakness is the refusal to face one's own fear. It is not the absence of power, it is the fear of pain. Every cruel man begins here. A small fear, ignored. A humiliation, denit. At hindernis, shame. He learns that to be gentle is to be unsafe. He learns that to be open is to be mocked. He learns that to feel is to bleed. So he begins to build armor, thick, cold, glittering armor made of pride. And the heavier it becomes, the more it drags him into darkness. Behind that armor grows resentment, the slow poison of the wounded soul. He begins to hate what he cannot control. He begins to despise what he cannot understand. And most of all, he begins to fear what he cannot dominate. Resentment is weakness petrified. It is the acid that eats through compassion and leaves only hunger. Every tyrant was once a child told that he was nothing. Every bully was once someone whose cry for help went unheard. Every zealot was once a dreamer betrayed by his own doubt. The wound festers, and the mind, unable to endure it, turns outward. What I cannot heal in me, he says, I will punish in others. This is how fragility becomes aggression, how insecurity becomes ideology, how self-hatred becomes policy. The weak man cannot bear the mirror, so he smashes it. He destroys the evidence of his own reflection. He calls that destruction justice, morality, righteous anger. But what he really means is, let me not feel small. The cruel man's greatest fear is not defeat, it is exposure. To be seen, trembling. To be known as breakable. To be caught, needing love. So he buries the need under layers of command. He hides it behind achievement, titles, ideals, armies, screens. The more fragile he is inside, the more ruthless he becomes outside. Power is not his goal. It is his medicine. A medicine that never heals, only numbs. He craves validation because it silences the inner critic. But validation fades. So he must seek more. Followers, possessions, victories, noise. Everything becomes a substitute for peace. And every substitute must grow louder to hide its emptiness. The weak man builds empires not to rule, but to feel real. His cruelty is not pleasure, it is anesthesia. He inflicts pain to prove he still exists. Because numbness is the secret terror of fragility. To feel nothing is worse than to feel pain. So he chooses pain, yours, his, the world's. He calls it destiny. But it is addiction. He feeds on fear, because fear confirms he has power. If others tremble, he must be strong. If others suffer, he must have worth. This is the arithmetic of weakness. A false equation written in blood. I cause pain, therefore I am. And yet, beneath the violence, he is still that frightened child. The one who could not bear to be small. The need to appear invincible is the final form of helplessness. Because he can never rest, he must defend his image every waking hour. Every glance feels like a threat. Every question feels like mockery. Every silence feels like judgment. And so he reacts, always reacts. He cannot choose. He cannot pause. He cannot breathe. The strong can endure stillness. The weak cannot. That is why the weak man confuses control with safety. To him, stillness is danger. To him, surrender is humiliation. He cannot yield without dissolving. So he hardens himself, and the harder he becomes, the more brittle he is. Every fragile thing breaks pretending to be steel. The weak man's mind is a fortress with no exit. He locks himself inside to feel secure, then wonders why he suffocates. He calls his isolation strength, but it is fear with a vocabulary. His aggression is language, the only one he trusts. He uses anger because it makes him feel alive, because it drowns out shame, because it gives the illusion of control, and the world applauds it. It mistakes volume for courage. It mistakes cruelty for leadership. It mistakes certainty for wisdom. We raise generations of boys and tell them not to cry. Then we wonder why men grow up unable to love. We praise domination as confidence when it is only fear in armor. We teach repression and then call the explosion of that repression masculinity. But repression is not strength, it is pressure. And every pressure eventually must break. That breaking, when magnified by power, becomes cruelty. History repeats the same pattern. The fragile ascend, the fearful rule, the wounded preach, and the world pays. This is the anatomy of weakness. A soul that cannot stand the mirror of its own fear, so it smashes the mirrors around it until it feels alone again. And yet, no man can truly escape himself. Every act of cruelty circles back. Every wound inflicted becomes a scar on his own consciousness. He may silence his victims, but he cannot silence the echo in his mind. And so he grows harder, colder, impt tier. He becomes his own punishment. For the cruel man is not free. He is enslaved to his performance of power. He is condemned to repeat the gesture of control. Because without it, he disappears. That disappearance, that quiet void where he would have to feel, is what he fears most. So he builds, he conquers, he rages, and all the while he decays. This is how weakness devours the world, not through force, but through fear. The fragile become cruel, and the cruel inherit the earth. They turn it into a reflection of their own sickness, a world where tenderness is mocked and gentleness is punished. But remember this, the root of cruelty is always self-contempt, and the man who despises himself will make the whole world pay for it. Weakness was once personal, a man's private sickness. A silent trembling he carried alone. Now it has become collective. An institution, a culture. We have industrialized fragility. We have built systems to protect the ego, to feed it, to dress it in glory, and to call the performance progress. We no longer raise men to be strong. We raise them to appear strong. And appearance, in time, becomes the only reality that matters. The mask replaces the face. The posture replaces the spine. The image devours the soul. A fragile generation builds a fragile world. One obsessed with dominance, terrified of silence, addicted to applause. We tell men that to be gentle is to be weak, that to hesitate is to fail, that to question is to betray. And so they stop listening. They start performing. We have mistaken aggression for confidence. And now we suffer the consequences. A society of actors in armor. Each man playing a role he secretly despises, each terrified that someone will see the shaking underneath. The fragile seek safety in the crowd. They find in numbers what they lack in conviction. And when weakness multiplies, it becomes ideology. Listen closely. Every totalitarian movement begins as a therapy for fear. The weak man cannot live with doubt. So he creates certainty, rigid, absolute, mechanical certainty. He builds dogmas to protect himself from the complexity of thought. He builds hierarchies to hide his insecurity behind ranks. He builds enemies to distract himself from the one enemy he cannot conquer himself. When millions share the same weakness, they call it truth. And that truth demands obedience. That is how cruelty becomes collective. The frightened find each other. They merge their fears and call the merger faith, patriotism, ideology, or justice. The crowd is the coward's camouflage. Together, they feel invincible. Together, they feel righteous. Together, they can commit atrocities that alone they would never dare. History repeats this pattern like a curse. Fragile men with loud voices, wounded egos wearing crowns, empires built not on confidence but on insecurity. The dictator is simply the most frightened man in the room, the one whose fear has learned to organize itself. He feeds the crowd the illusion of strength. They feed him the illusion of love. Together, they build a nightmare and call it destiny. But this sickness does not live only in politics. It lives in every corner of our culture. The marketplace has become a mirror for the fragile. It sells them the strength they cannot feel. Buy this, it says, you'll matter. Wear this, it says, you'll belong. Dominate, it says, you'll be free. Consumerism is fragility, commodified. An endless supply of external solutions for internal emptiness. The ego, addicted to status, becomes the perfect customer, forever dissatisfied, forever reaching. Even entertainment has become a shrine to insecurity. We celebrate cruelty as power. We glorify humiliation as victory. We film the fall of others and call it content. We laugh at those who fail, so we can forget how close we are to failing ourselves. The spectacle feeds on shame. The audience applauds because they are terrified of being next. This is the new liturgy of fragility, a religion without priests, where algorithms are gods and attention is the sacrament. The digital age is the perfect reflection of the weak man's mind, loud, reactive, desperate to be seen. He confuses visibility with worth, so he floods the void with himself. He performs opinions, he manufactures outrage, he competes for wounds. Each post, each rant, each argument, another attempt to escape the silence that would expose him. The internet has become the stage where weakness rehearses dominance. Every cruelty typed in rage is a confession. I feel powerless. The digital mob is the modern army of the insecure. Anonymous, echoing, endless. A cathedral of projection, they do not think, they react. They do not converse, they compete. They do not seek truth, they seek confirmation. And in this endless noise, the fragile find temporary relief. They belong to something. They matter for a moment. They exist through the destruction of others. That is how weakness scales. That is how fragility becomes culture, a civilization of noise built by men afraid of quiet. A world of dominance built by those terrified of irrelevance. The cult of success is just another disguise. It preaches empowerment, but its gospel is fear. Every slogan whispers, you are not enough. Every product says, fix yourself. Every image shouts, be more. And so the will spins faster. The machine grows louder, and the fragile ego never rests. He works not to live, but to drown out his own awareness. He achieves, not to grow, but to escape the terror of stillness. This is the lie that sustains the system, that productivity is purpose, that visibility is power, that control is peace. But a man who defines himself by control will forever be at war with life, because life cannot be controlled. It can only be witnessed. And that is what the fragile cannot do. They cannot watch without intervening. They cannot love without owning. They cannot believe without enforcing. The strong create. The weak imitate. The strong serve truth. The weak sell it. This is the architecture of modern cruelty, a culture built on the fear of vulnerability. Even art has been conscripted. It no longer reveals, it distracts. It no longer heals, it performs. The artist, too, must compete for relevance, shouting into the same void, begging the same algorithm for mercy. And what is left of beauty when it must justify its existence with numbers? What is left of truth when no one can bear to be uncertain? What is left of love when every affection is filtered through vanity? We have replaced meaning with metrics and called the result civilization. But it is not civilization. It is a performance of strength built on collective fragility. You see, the cruel world is not born from evil men. It is born from ordinary men who cannot endure being ordinary. When weakness becomes the norm, arrogance becomes the mask. And when arrogance becomes culture, cruelty becomes law. This is how societies collapse, not through external enemies, but through internal fragility masquerading as power. The weak man, multiplied by millions, is the architect of every empire of fear. He builds the world in his image, and the world becomes brittle, loud, hollow. A civilization that punishes gentleness is one already preparing its own ruin. The cruel world you see today is not the failure of humanity. It is the confession of its weakness. Fear is expensive. It costs empathy first, then intimacy, then everything else that makes us human. When men leave a rail, they cannot afford to feel. Feeling becomes a liability. Compassion becomes a threat. Love becomes exposure. So they amputate tenderness to survive. They mistake numbness for strength. They confuse control with safety. And thus begins the quiet ruin. The weak man's first victim is empathy. He cannot bear to imagine another's pain because that would awaken his own. So he hardens. He builds walls of cynicism. He replaces feeling with opinion. He learns to look without seeing. Soon, cruelty no longer shocks him. He scrolls past it. He laughs at it. He intellectualizes it. To feel nothing is his greatest achievement. He has become, in his own eyes, realistic. But realism without compassion is only despair with better grammar. He tells himself the world is cruel. He forgets that he helped make it so. The cost of fear is not paid in blood first. It is paid in silence, in the small hesitations of conscience, in the moments when we could have been kind, but chose to be clever instead. It is in the joke that belittles, the gesture that excludes, the shrug that ignores, 1,000 small acts of self-protection that accumulate into a world incapable of love. When men fear vulnerability, they begin to treat sincerity as danger. They cannot stand open hearts. They expose what they have buried, so they mock tenderness. They call it naivete. They call it weakness. They call it feminine. And by doing so, they murder the only parts of themselves capable of redemption. The death of empathy breeds the death of intimacy. Because love is a dialogue between two vulnerabilities. And the weak man can tolerate only one his own, disguised. He wants affection without exposure, companionship without honesty, possession without surrender. He confuses affection with control. He says, "You are mine," when what he means is, "You are my mirror." But love cannot bloom in mirrors. It needs soil, the dark, uncertain ground of shared fragility. Without that, relationships become wars of validation. Two frightened people trading control, each terrified of being seen without armor. The weak man cannot be loved. He can only be admired. Because admiration is safe. It keeps distance. It does not touch the wound. And so he builds relationships like fortresses. Grand, imposing, empty. He calls it independence. But it is isolation disguised as dignity. He spends his life surrounded by people, yet these untouched. Fear has made him allergic to closeness. And this allergy spreads through nations. Whole societies that cannot love become obsessed with spectacle. They substitute unity with identity. They replace trust with control. They worship power because it promises protection. But protection without intimacy is the architecture of tyranny. Look around. Our politics are marriages without affection. Our economies are friendships without trust. Our institutions are families without compassion. The cost of fear is civilization emptied of soul. You can see it in the faces of the ambitious, beautiful, confident, dead behind the eyes. You can hear it in the voices of the powerful, measured, persuasive, hollow. You can feel it in the streets. Noise without music, movement without meaning. Everywhere, people trying to prove they matter because they no longer know they do. Fear has turned life into performance. And performance, repeated long enough, becomes identity. The result is a world of surfaces, polished, shining, heartless. We care about causes, but not people. We defend principles we do not live. We speak loudly about love, while fearing its first demand, surrender. Fear has taught us to value dominance over understanding. And dominance, once worshipped, destroys empathy completely. For to dominate another, you must first erase their humanity. You must see them as object, obstacle, threat. And once you do that to others, you do it to yourself. You begin to treat your own soul as a tool, a thing to manage, manipulate, optimize. You become your own tyrant. This is the secret tragedy of the weak man. He enslaves himself first. He does not rule his fear. He works for it. His entire life becomes a job, maintaining the illusion that he is strong. He cannot rest because rest would reveal the emptiness he keeps running from. So he lives in motion, in endless proving. He burns his time, his love, his mind as offerings to the false god of control. And when exhaustion comes, he calls it fulfillment. This, then, is the cost of fear, the extinction of empathy, the collapse of intimacy, the loss of peace. The cruel world is not created by evil men, but by frightened men who build systems to protect themselves from the mirror. And those systems, political, social, technological, end up reflecting exactly what they fear to see. A world of strength without stability. A world of power without wisdom. A world of bodies without souls. In such a world, even love becomes a weapon. Even art becomes propaganda. Even faith becomes control. The weak man's fear reshapes everything he touches, until all that remains is a civilization armored against itself. No tenderness, no trust, no truth. Only performance, only protection, only noise. The air grows thinner with every generation that mistakes aggression for identity. We are choking on our own defense mechanisms. And beneath all the noise, beneath the politics, the markets, the wars, lies the same small, trembling question. What if I am not enough? The cruel world exists because no one dares to answer it honestly. It is easy to despise the cruel. It is easy to point at tyrants, at bullies, at the loud and the ruthless. It is harder to look at the quiet cruelty that lives inside us. The cruelty of indifference, the cruelty of silence, the cruelty of looking away. You think you are different? That you would never harm, never dominate, never betray? Look closer. Cruelty is not an act, it is a potential, and it lives in everyone who has ever felt powerless. When we are humiliated, we imagine revenge. When we are ignored, we fantasize about being feared. When we are wounded, we secretly hope the world will bleed with us. This is the shadow we carry, the same shadow that builds empires, that burns cities, that divides families, that destroys love. We call ourselves victims of a cruel world, but each of us contributes to its cruelty every time we act from fear. Every time you raise your voice to feel important, every time you cut someone down to protect your pride, every time you dismiss another's pain because it resembles your own. These are small violences, the daily rehearsals of tyranny. The weak man does not only live in palaces or offices, he lives in you, he lives in me. He lives in every unguarded impulse to control what frightens us. Do not look away from that truth. If you do, it will rule you. To confront your weakness is the most dangerous act of honesty, because the moment you see it, you can no longer pretend that cruelty belongs only to others. The tyrant you condemn externally is only your own fear made visible. Schopenhauer said, "Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." This is the nightmare of self-knowledge. To see that even your motives are not your own. Your righteousness hides revenge. Your generosity hides pride. Your confidence hides terror. To know this is to stand naked before yourself. And that is why most men prefer distraction, ideology, religion, noise, anything that spares them the sight of their own smallness. But the philosopher has no such refuge. He must look, he must see the trembling in his own hands, and know that it is not unique. This trembling connects all of us. It is the quiet thread that binds humanity, our shared fragility. The strong man is not the one who hides it. He is the one who admits it. True strength begins the moment you stop defending your weakness, the moment you stop pretending to be above it, the moment you can say, "Yes, I am afraid. Yes, I am insecure. Yes, I have been cruel," and you do not flinch. In that moment, fear loses its power, because it thrives only in denial. Once it is seen, it cannot command you. To face your weakness is to reclaim your freedom. To see the trembling without needing to hide it, that is power. Gentleness is not the absence of fear. It is the mastery of it. But to reach gentleness, you must pass through the desert of self-knowledge. You must walk through the heat of shame, through the mirage of pride, through the bones of every illusion you've built to feel safe. You must see yourself as you truly are, small, fragile, temporary, and love that creature anyway. That is the rarest courage. We talk about bravery in terms of conquest, but the greatest conquest is internal. To sit alone with your own weakness and not turn away. Try it. Sit in silence and watch what rises. The irritation, the anxiety, the need to move, to escape, to justify. That is weakness speaking. Do not fight it. Do not indulge it. Observe it. When you observe it without judgment, it begins to lose its venom. What was once humiliation becomes humility. What was once fear becomes compassion. You begin to see others differently. You recognize their cruelty not as evil, but as pain. You recognize your anger not as justice, but as grief. Compassion is born not from moral superiority, but from shared weakness honestly faced. The man who knows his own fragility can never again delight in the humiliation of another, because he sees himself in every trembling face. The tyrant is still dangerous, but no longer mysterious. You understand him. You see the child beneath the crown. And when you see him clearly, you stop worshipping him. You stop fearing him. You may even pity him. That pity is not weakness. It is power purified of hatred. The mirror does not lie. It shows you everything. Your vanity, your cowardice, your cruelty, your tenderness. The weak man hides from that reflection. The strong man kneels before it. Strength is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to face it honestly, to live with it gently, to speak to it kindly. Why are you afraid, you ask yourself? And the silence answers, because I thought I had to be more than human. That is the lie. That is the root of cruelty, the refusal to accept our shared smallness. Once you accept it, the need to prove yourself evaporates. The need to dominate dissolves. The will to wound fades. You can finally breathe. You can finally look at others without comparing, listen without defending, care without owning. This is the liberation that follows confrontation, not triumph clarity. The strong man is not the one who stands above weakness. He is the one who stands with it, who walks beside it, who makes peace with his trembling. He no longer creates cruel worlds. He creates space for tenderness, for silence, for truth.